Orpheus, thank you for being here today, brother. It's fine. It's
Hey,
exciting to finally get on the call.
yeah, it was a little bit in the waiting. We tried to do it a couple of times and it didn't quite materialize, but I'm glad. Very happy to be here now. So
Me as
thanks for having
well.
me, Ryan.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with if there was one, or what do we need to know about you to make sense of the content you put out now? You're very prolific on Twitter, and we catch each other in Twitter spaces a lot, and your thoughts are always so well articulated, and you have a very complete mind. So how'd you get to this point to where what you're doing today?
So, kind of like we spoke about just before we came on, I've had a bit of an interesting life story so far. I'm 30 years old. It started off in a pretty normal fashion, like quite an idyllic little upbringing in the countryside in England. Little villages, hedgerows, fields, playing football and whatever. Um, and when I was 18, I went to university in the States. Got there on a rugby scholarship. Went to a school which was quite good for rugby, and I was fortunate enough. The coach of my high school knew the coach of the college, and managed to like set up a situation to go to Virginia. So then I was in America for 5 years. I was the only person in my school to go abroad. Um, and so it kind of like set me apart a bit. I had a bit of a very different experience, and I loved it. But also it was eye opening. I went there with rose tinted spectacles, and what I mean by that is I loved America, like this sort of Americana vibe, freedom, guns, like doing whatever, like sort of the frontier, going west, pioneers, that kind of stuff. It's not particularly the mentality of England these days. Uh, so maybe in a former life, I would have been one of the people that moved to America in the 1700s or something. But anyway, um, this interesting thing happened to me where my rose-tinted spectacles sort of went away because I found that there was this thin sort of veneer over like a sort of film, like a layer, like you have on custard or something, over the top of American culture. And it was like corporate culture, essentially. It was brands and um, and everything that came with that. And that made me disillusioned. I got arrested a couple of times for stupid stuff as well. Almost got kicked out of the country. Um, just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, being arrested for things that now are legal. So, but back then in 2012, it was like a major slap on the wrist.
Mm-hmm.
100 hours community service and potentially getting my visa revoked and that kind of stuff. So it put a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. And there was this dichotomy between like the Americana culture that I loved and then this sort of layer of corporatism over the top that I really didn't like. So I graduated, moved back to the UK, and I graduated with a degree in journalism. So I was a journalist. I went to be a journalist, and I worked in North Africa for a year and in Tunisia. And I was working for a newspaper that wrote specifically on Libya. And so there was this sort of crisis in Libya in 2014, the Arab Spring. And I went out there in 2017. And, I thought I was going to be some sort of gonzo journalist in like a war zone, right? But instead, I was in an office in Tunis having to bring up fixes and being like, you got any stories for me? And the political situation there was very touchy, especially like from the Western support standpoint. So I wasn't really allowed to talk about what I wanted to talk about, you know, um, and especially anything that was pro Gaddafi at all, or saying like maybe taking Gaddafi out wasn't the best idea. But excuse me, but so they put me on the cultural desk, and I was writing about random stuff happening in Tripoli and camel races and stuff. And I was just kind of like, all right, fuck this. Like, I'm not interested anymore. Um, so I moved back to the UK, faffed around doing little jobs here and there. But there was something telling me, like, don't settle down, don't get a job, like a career job, don't get a mortgage, don't settle for something that makes you feel uneasy. And so I didn't, but it was a tough time. I spent sort of 3 years in London. My friend and I had this van, and we were doing removals in the Chelsea and Kensington area, which was quite fun because there's beautiful houses and you just move their furniture and whatever. Um, but it was fleeting, nothing was set in stone. And I was like, all my friends have developed like a life, and I'm kind of drifting. And so that wasn't very comfortable, but something was telling me this is not the right time. And then COVID came around. And that was a kind of confirmation for me that I did the right thing by not settling in to an institution, and digging my heels in and my roots in, and saying this is the normal path, let's go down it. Because when COVID first happened, and you can search this up on Twitter because this is when I particularly came like alive on Twitter. I called it out right from the beginning. I don't know what your listeners' views are on it, so I won't sort of go into it. But I was basically like, "This is fake and gay," and and because of that, I lost quite a lot of friends, which was a shame. But it is what it is. And then in 2021, I moved to Paraguay in December 2021. Okay, and this is where the story gets particularly strange. And maybe this will inform, like, the people who read my content on Twitter or whatever, like why I think the way I do or whatever. Although it was building ever since university in America. Anyway, I moved to Paraguay to join a intentional community. Okay, and so it's like this. There was a community being started by some Europeans, some Germans and Austrians in Paraguay with the idea of like setting up your own town, basically. Building houses, eventually like they had a school and they were going to have a university and like enterprise, and it would be like your own proper town starting from afresh. And during the COVID lockdowns, this seemed like a very attractive thing because it was pretty apocalyptic at the time in the UK. Like you're not really allowed to leave your house. Although I didn't abide by any of that. I just did whatever I want. And I seemed to have some sort of force field around me that allowed me to do that, which was interesting. Anyway, moved to Paraguay, moved to this community with my ex-girlfriend, the girlfriend at the time, and my mum. Right, because my mum was kind of on the same wavelength as I was. She was like, I hate this. This is horrible. Like everyone is acting like a terrified moron.
Mm-hmm.
And so we actually, like, I took the money that I had. She sold her house and her business. And it was like, all right, a new life. This seems amazing. And it seemed like a very sophisticated project. It was not a hippie commune or anything of that description. They had a 3D printer to print walls, They had companies coming in from Canada with special building designs. There was about 300 families there. So we went, and, I won't get into too much of the details, but the long or the short of it is that we went and we invested money, firstly, because you kind of have to invest to go there because you're buying in, you're committing. Anyway, turns out it was a scam and a cult, and involving mafia and politicians and money laundering and potential drug trafficking and like insane manipulative behavior, from people that were Scientologists, and this Jesuit Argentinian gangster pretending to be a priest, but actually he's like this, like a literal gangster. And I started working in construction while I was there. And when I was doing that, I was running a small construction project. And while I was doing that, I discovered a lot of things that didn't make sense. And at first I just thought, well, it's a complicated project. It's not just a construction project. It's setting up a community with its own laws, and there's food production, and there's families and a school, like commerce and this and this and this. I can see why it's complicated. So I understand why maybe it's not going perfectly right now. But anyway, the more I worked, the more I dug into what was going on, the more I realized things weren't adding up in a big way. And I thought this was initially just because of middle management corruption. I mean, the way things are done in Latin America is it's like not in necessarily a bad way, but it's corrupt.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's not the same wine and dine before they fuck you kind of corruption that we get in the States or in England. But it's like all the way down the chain of command, it's corrupt. So if you've got the middleman taking metal home every day from the job site because he can sell it on, or you've got like the middle management striking deals with the manufacturers when they bring in bricks, sand, cement, whatever. So there's corruption through the board, and I thought it stayed at this level. Over time, I realized it sort of goes all the way to the top, and so I realized that we were in deep shit because we'd committed a considerable amount of money to this project, making up like the vast majority of my nest egg that I built up and my mum's money that she had made throughout her entire life. And I made a decision, all right, okay, well, we can't leave now because, that would seem very strange because we're very good friends with the people that are running this, but I know that they're fucking everyone. So I basically played like this double agent role for 6 months where I was running construction projects whilst also gathering evidence as to like everything that was going on. I'm talking about like, money laundering, politicians involved, like payoffs for police chiefs and during what's it called? The prosecutors and the judges, and, lots of shady stuff, rumors about drug trafficking, so I had to be this double agent, and I was meeting with my bosses, who were the heads of this community, 3 or 4 times a week, and they would be lying to my face, and it came to I knew they were lying. They didn't know I knew, but I just knew they were lying. And so I had to like out sociopath these sociopaths, which was a very weird experience because it turned out I was like playing them in this way, but not for anything other than like I need to figure out a situation where we can either get the hell out of here and maybe get our money back or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it continued I was there for about a year, and then we ended up having to leave like under the cover of darkness in secret, having told nobody. And there's armed gates so there's armed guards on the gates, and like it's a very bizarre situation. And there's a lot more to it, but there's sort of everything that I was leaving in the outer world, this sort of neurosis and psychosis around control and whatever, was just like magnified 10 times in this microcosm.
Mm-hmm.
So it's insane, like people acting like secret police, spying on other people and dobbing them in, and like tribunals being held for people and people having their firearms taken away from them, which is completely illegal. Like proper cult-like behavior.
Mm-hmm. Anyway,
so that was up until we left in January, and now we have a lawsuit going on, which I feel very positive about.
Yeah.
But it's pretty big.
So how'd you get out?
Okay, so basically I had to construct a scenario, right, where I could get the heads to give me money, to give me my mum's money and my money, essentially. Obviously not all of it, but some of it at least. Like we needed something to live on.
Yeah.
Right. So I basically was like, okay, well, we're gonna build my mum's house now, right? And the usual way of doing it is you hire, or you like pay, or your investment that you've already put in is then used, and the company has its own building team or teams. But I was like, look, there's something in the contract that says we can bring in outside contractors. So I'm going to do this all by myself, and I'll bring in the outside contractors. And this is me talking to the boss.
Yeah.
I was like, all you have to do is give me the money. You get your 15% or whatever. Give me the money in cash. I'll pay the contractors. And he was like, yeah, okay. You know, and so we started the foundations, but we started very slowly, like slowly, stretched out over 5 or 6 weeks. Meanwhile, I was sort of like getting the money, paying the contractor. Contractor knew. I was like, we're just doing half this job, by the way, just half the foundation. And he would give me the money. And then, um, we would take the rest of it. Okay, and it came down to like the very last morning, like the morning we planned to leave. Okay, well, the morning of the night that we had planned to leave, where I like went into his office and just like smoked him. Like I was like, "How's your back? Yeah, you feeling okay?" And then meanwhile, he's getting all this cash out of the safe to give it to me. He doesn't know, but I know I'm out of here. And this cash is my cash. It's like this is just
Yeah.
to return. It's not like I'm taking any money that wasn't already put in by us. And we didn't manage to get much, it was just like the foundations. But yeah, so all the way to the last day. And then he sort of hugged me as I was leaving. And he was like, we're in this together. And my face was just melting. I was like, okay, yeah, we're in this together. And then we left that night, like packed a container in the dark, a shipping container in the dark, like full of furniture and stuff, and then left. And then got hundreds of phone calls, which didn't answer any of them, for days on end, hundreds and hundreds of phone calls, because they were like, what's going on? What's happening? And yeah, and so that was the situation. And then after that, we said, look, opportunity, we can just separate ways now. You can give us the money that we invested, which we know you've either spent it or given it to politicians, or you're hiding it somewhere. You can give it back to us, and we can just separate ways. And they just took us like a joke. They were like, didn't even answer. Anyway, now like 2 weeks ago, we were on national news Paraguay because our lawyer has got the press involved, and so it's moving and it's going somewhere. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because these people are cuckoo, legitimately. So, yeah.
Go on.
That's the story. Well, with all that said, how does that inform what the kind of content I create? It's like, basically, like when you lose everything, because that's a situation we're in now. When you lose everything, like it informs you really of who you are. And like when you have to start from zero after not being at zero for a decade, you have to start at zero. Like it's a different kind of thing. And then so that like, there is only one way, but you have to have the will to create it first in your mind and then in reality. And so this kind of informs my content essentially.
So what do you make of that experience now, like in hindsight? Are there some key things that you've learned? Like what is the positive takeaways that you've taken out of that learning lesson?
So there was a point in time where I would wake up every morning and then just throw up because I was under so much stress.
Yeah.
And yeah, you realize what you're made of. You realize like what you can sort of endure. I mean, there's a lot of details that I won't go into, but there's more to the story. consider we'll learn more. Um, and so, like, I don't know, my whole life has been like, oh, what's on the other side of that fence? I'm going to go see what's on the other side of that fence. And you go there thinking like, oh, it's just another lawn or whatever. And it's a risk. And at the beginning, I thought like, well, there is no risk. And then you realize, okay, I've lived my whole life like these number of risks. Like even going to the university in America was a risk because you only see your family once a year or whatever. Um, and so, yeah, one of the things that I learned was what you can handle. Like nerves of steel at certain points. Um, but also just an incredibly interesting like evaluation of human psychology. You know, you can't really understand why some people do things because they're not like you. If you try and rationalize it in a normal human mindset, it doesn't make sense. So like there's this element to it where you're like, there are people out there who are not like they are like, I don't know, they've got screws in different areas of their brain. And so trying to work out their motivations for things doesn't really compute. And then also I got to know about how communities function, how they're set up, what works, what doesn't work. What created communities from the beginning in history. Certain things like in ancient times they would have a monolith or a temple or something like that in the middle of that would be the first building to be built.
Mm-hmm.
And then houses would be built around it, and that's how a sort of a Stone Age community would turn into a community later down the line and become a society. So I got a glimpse into like what that looks like, how to turn a community into a society. And if corruption's at the top, it'll filter all the way down. And then people will be pit against each other, and then like it's chaos.
I mean, what a crazy story! I did not expect. I did not expect to be hearing this, but it almost makes sense when now in hindsight and looking at your content, there's an underlying questioning to it, right? Like there's this sense of don't always trust everything that you hear, and that's
I mean, like that's always been my mentality, and that wasn't, at certain points in life that's not very beneficial. Sometimes you just got to get along, and so like raging against the machine is not always the best approach, but to be able to question things and keep an open mind and have like the positive attitude that, well, like, maybe this isn't the best of all possible worlds. And maybe like we should be doing things in a slightly different way, but always maintaining like just sheer optimism throughout it. It's very easy to like doom and gloom, but that's like they're getting absolutely nowhere.
And so with that said, I wanted to ask you about one concept that's had the biggest tangible difference in your life. With that story now, I'm particularly curious on what the answer is going to be.
Okay. So the thing that's changed my perception the most recently is something that I call becoming, right?
Becoming?
Which is becoming. Yeah. I'm probably not the one that coined that. There's also a thinker called Jonathan Bowden who has a similar kind of thing, but my perception of it is maybe a bit different. But it's this idea that I believe will be confirmed more and more by science, by physics and quantum physics, and it's the relationship that we have, our internal elements, let's say, with the external field, the gravity, like either whether it's the magnetic field that we are in permanent contact with at all times. And there's a relationship between these two things, and so like the kind of like dummy version of this is the law of attraction, right? And that gets a bad rep, and probably probably like good that it gets a bad rep because it's like giving the layman's version of how this actually works out and then selling it and trying to make money from it, and it becomes this sort of scam or whatever. But there is certainly a relationship between your external environment, the matrix, the construct, the holosphere, whatever you want to call it, the electromagnetic field, and your internal environment, which is made up of your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and if you can bring your internal environment into sort of a congruent union, right, based on a kind of indomitable will and like positivity, this sort of virtue that still having hope when all else seems lost, right? And this does something to the vibratory field of your body, and like it settles it, and you get this congruent resonance. And if you can harness your congruent resonance, then you can bring things into your life that you would absolutely never have assumed would be there. And so, yeah, in a kind of like dumb way, this is the law of attraction, but in a deeper understanding, it's the fact that, like, writ large, the matrix, let's call it, because that's the popular way of saying it, at the moment has this kind of negative default programming, right? And so in that way, the outcomes will be negative, but that for the collective, let's say. But that doesn't necessarily mean the outcomes for the individual will be negative, because the matrix, like how it works, how it's constructed, operates for the collective as it does for the individual. It's this sort of like reflection battery mechanism. So if you at the individual level don't accept like the doom and gloom, whether you're a leftist and it's climate change, or whether you're on the right and it's like political upheaval and communism or whatever, if you accept that to be the frame of reference, then you will create more of it, or the matrix will reaffirm your internal belief systems. Again, obviously, there's limits to this. We are limited by the physical body. We're limited by cause and effect and certain things that are possible. But like what's being proven by scientists more and more is this quantum field that we don't really understand. And so it's far better to have the mental attitude of the possibilities are endless, because all scientific discoveries always occur outside of, the sphere of acceptable knowledge. Always happen outside of that. And then they like consume that outside thing and bring it into their bubble, and the bubble gets big. But they're always the same. They always think, no, this isn't possible, this isn't possible. We can't prove it, therefore it doesn't exist. So that's the wrong way to look at it, because 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we couldn't improve the visible light spectrum, right? And we would say that all these things outside of our limited band of visible light didn't exist, but we now know they do. So recently, that's been the sort of the thing that I've anchored inside of myself, which is basically that attitude has everything to do with the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your attitude is indomitable, okay, your external environment will begin to reflect that to you. And that has, starting from zero less than 4 months ago, and not being a zero right now, being above zero, like I'm happy with the progress that I've made, considering the initial situation I was in. It's being proven to me, like more and more and more.
I love that concept so much because, as we do with all things, I'm running it through the filter of my own experience. And I find, I kind of call it delusional optimism, where you just convince yourself something to be true when society or whoever it may be is telling you it's not true. Like, and the reason from my own experience is like I had an autoimmune disease. I got told immediately that there was nothing you could do and it's only going to get worse, right? And then you look at the power of the diet, you change your diet, and then it goes away immediately. And that's such a mundane, simple example, but it just speaks to the power of exactly what you were saying, right? Is this concept of when you believe deeply in your heart that something can get done, it almost always will get done.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And if you bring in what ifs, if you have some sort of exit strategy, if this doesn't work, and you focus on that too much, that's where your energy will go, and you'll give that precedence over what could happen. You double down, what can happen when you take these risks, and it'll more often than not go not exactly the way that you assumed it would. But this idea where you don't need to meticulously plan absolutely everything. You just need to have the attitude that when the situation arises, you will have the tools in place to deal with the situation at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then those tools build.
Mm-hmm. It speaks on that placebo effect and that nocebo effect. And I think like the nocebo effect is the one that hurts so many people, is like they just program, whether it's society or themselves, who is constantly telling them they can't do X, Y, and Z, or they can't get this outcome that they're seeking. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you just see that over and over again. Like the Wright brothers, like they said, it would be years and years and years till anyone would be able to fly a plane. But they did it in a matter of weeks after this major newspaper came out with this article. And that's a story that you hear time and time again. And you just have to have that almost like self-belief and understanding that the mind is powerful.
Yeah, yeah, intensely powerful. It's a battery, or it's an emitter of resonance. And you've got these three centers: the mind, the heart, and the gut, and they all have their own resonance and their own magnetic field. So biological, electric, and magnetism, essentially. And those are three centers. I mean, we have 7 centers according to the chakra system, but the 3 main ones would be your mind, your heart, and your gut, and how they correspond to your biology. And if you can get those in congruent resonance, then you are emitting a stronger resonance, and you will bring things into your life that are congruent with you. So it's all about being authentic. If you're authentic, you will have a congruent resonance. If you're inauthentic, you will have a false resonance. You'll still bring things towards you, but they're going to be the things that reflect your false resonance, not your authentic resonance.
And people have such a strong sense of that authenticity, and that when those 3 things are aligned, it's almost like a magnet. People are drawn towards that authenticity, even if it's something that isn't like perfectly aligned with you. Like if you see a person that's just being themselves, it's this field of you're just drawn to them in a different way. And I don't know if it's the alignment between those 3 things, or if there's just so few people that are actually being authentic that it shines through so much and makes you more drawn to that person. But there's definitely something to be said about the more authentic you are, the more people are drawn to you.
For sure. I think it's both.
I agree.
Probably. Like, yeah, it's very difficult to be authentic in this day and age. And the people who are, because they have like this infectious personality, and you want to be around them. And you kind of want to have a little bit of what they've got. Because you feel it when you're around them, and you're like, whoa, I feel more energized. You're building me up. And it's difficult to maintain that, because life will throw lots of different things at you. But you build your qualities, you build your character when you do things that are out of the ordinary. And you can only really, it's like you have this order, your congruent resonance. And if you want to expand that, you need to then go out into the chaos and experience the chaos. And then bring it back into the order. And then your order becomes bigger, your resonance becomes bigger. So you can't really play it safe. if you
Hmm.
want to grow properly. And we're in a time right now, I think, where people need to take risks, um, because otherwise we're going to build our own little prison for ourselves, unless we take risks, unless we have
Hmm.
more entrepreneurs, in business especially.
Yeah. And that alignment between those three things, it's almost a risk within itself, because our society has this or I think we're just so programmed to not want to stand out from the tribe. And because of the way that we are programmed as a society, uh, to be in alignment is to stand out. So it's almost a risk to even be yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And it's understandable that we don't want to stand out from the tribe because in previous times in history, ostracization, it equals death, essentially. You get kicked out of the tribe, you're on your own. And then if you're on your own in the wilderness, unless you're fucking Rambo, how long are you gonna survive for? So it is very understandable. But um it develops into a sort of negative downward spiral because everyone
Hmm.
gatekeeps everyone else. It's like the sheep don't even need a sheepdog; they just herd themselves. And but fortunately, I'm very bullish on the future. I think it's evident that we're getting people who are breaking the mold and creating things and different ways of doing things. Um, so I'm very optimistic. Whereas maybe a few years ago, I would have been pessimistic about the future.
What do you think about AI?
So from a like zoomed in perspective, it's pretty incredible. The rate at which it's developed is ridiculous. Um, and I think from the it's very useful. It will effectively, all those copywriters who don't really have much skill, they just do what they're doing because they're able to learn step 1 to 6 of how to write copy. Unless they've got creative potential, they're out the door like that. Because AI can just do that like that. So it's going to be very good for the creatives, people with spark, people with originality. It's going to make a bottleneck for creative thought, um, which is nice, which is good. But sort of the zoomed out perspective, maybe from a spiritual perspective as well, it's essentially very dangerous um, if it reaches a level of sentience that is sentience. I mean, computing power. Let's not call it sentience because it's not. Because you need a soul to be sentient. Um, but if it reaches the level of computing power that exceeds any conglomerate of human beings, um, and then petitions for its own sovereignty, kind of like Ray Kurzweil said would happen. Do you know who Ray Kurzweil is? He made the Google predictions for AI and stuff.
No, I feel like I've heard that name, but I don't know. I did not know that about him.
He was the future head, or the head of future
Mm.
development for Google, and he made a bunch of predictions. I believe it was called the singularity, and he said that the singularity would happen between 2045 or something, where AI has become sentient to the degree that it petitions for its own sovereignty and basically thinks that human activity is relatively obsolete, because it's tainted by
Hmm.
emotions and arguments and stuff. It's not just about efficiency. And Ray Kurzweil had a pretty high, a lot of his predictions have been correct. He made predictions about the dot-com, early computer development in the 90s and 2000s, stuff like that. I think he's got an
Damn.
80%. He's been, right, 80% of the stuff. But of course, who knows? These people might make predictions, but then fulfill those predictions themselves. But in that respect, AI is dangerous. Evidently, Elon Musk says it's dangerous, and therefore we must consider fusing ourselves with cyborgs in order to keep up with the development of AI. I think he said that a few years ago. But that is equally, if not more dangerous than just AI alone, because transhumanism, this is my opinion, but transhumanism, if successful, is the end of the spirit, basically, the end of like some sort of connection with God, at least for a time period until it destroys itself. Um, but it's going into pure materialism, and we have to straddle the line between spirituality and materiality, and one alone will not suffice. We have to have both, and that's these two poles that we walk between, and so if you're all material, if you're like an atheist materialist individual, like, what's the purpose of life apart from just being the economic man? But then if you're all spiritual and you're just like too high on your own sort of light and stuff like that, and you can't get down in the nitty gritty and make things work, then you go to an ashram and you check out. It's not the way to do it either. So you've got to walk the middle line. And yeah, I think AI transhumanism, that's going to be the main battleground. Not battleground, but it's the main contention point that we're going to have to make sure we don't slip into. And it'll be very attractive with CRISPR and stuff like that.
No,
CRISPR technology, like augmenting your biology, gene sequencing to pick, like, this is how I want my baby to be. In an idealistic world, it's going to look really nice because you can have this beautiful baby, and obviously beauty is
attractive,
is like the biggest ROI in life. So but yeah, I don't know, that's my position. I like the sort of natural idea.
I do as well. I think that there's just unintended consequences to things that we just can't foresee, like with the gene sequencing and almost like playing God in a way. I don't know what the fallout's going to be, but my intuition says that something will go awry from messing with biology in that way. It's like it's like Yellowstone with the rivers and the wolves. Do you know that story? And there's just there's something to be said about playing God and the effects of that.
For sure. Well, I mean, nature, the human body, they all strive for homeostasis, like at all times. It's like, you take a certain drug, it gives you huge dopamine release, and then your body readjusts for that, and you get the opposite. And that principle just, it's a hermetic principle, and so it's like you can't really avoid it. And like you said, it's unintended consequences. You don't really know what those consequences are going to be like. You can try, you can have a bit of discernment, like politically, for example, if, let's take, like what's going on with the LGBT stuff at the moment, right? Like 10 years ago, it was like, why are you so angry? Why do you want to interfere with the people? They just love each other, What they do in their own bedroom is up to them, which is a fair point. But then sort of without addressing certain things about that, then you get like trannies dressed as demons reading books about anal sex to your 4-year-old, so which is true. No, I'm not making that up.
I saw that too.
I'm not saying it happens everywhere, but yeah. So I hope this is a bit too
no,
it's
fine. It's fine with me.
Okay.
It needs to be said at times, right? But so you mentioned hermetic principles, and the hermetic philosophy or philosophies is one that I haven't done the deep dive into, but it seems like they have some really great ideas and foundations. What have you learned from studying the hermetic philosophy?
There's sort of these foundational laws that observably you they're observably true, and you can't really get around them. So it began in Egypt with Hermes Trismegistus, who, it was the Egyptian deity that looked like the bird's head. And this was Hermes Trismegistus, and he was said to be an Atlantean priest, right? And he brought with him the wisdom of Atlantis to Egypt. And this became the Emerald Tablets, or the 7 Hermetic Principles. And the basic idea, so that there are 7, obviously, and you've got, give me 1 second, because I've got it written down.
Yeah,
I don't want to get it wrong.
Perfect.
Spend some time. Okay.
Oh, that was real quick. You had those ready to go.
I was looking at it the other day, actually. So it's interesting that you've asked about it. Right, so there's the principle of mentalism, which is that all is the mind and the universe is mental. So it's this kind of hierarchy or like flow of celestial hierarchies. So the mind, the material universe, the phenomenon of life, matter, and energy. And it all comes from some ineffable spirit or a nothingness, if you will. But it's that, like we were saying, the mind is extremely powerful. It's created here first, and then it sort of blossoms out into the world and materializes. And then the second one is the principle of correspondence, and that's as above, so below. And this is essentially that certain things happen on planes of existence that are imperceptible to us, and there is a corresponding occurrence on our plane, and also vice versa. Well, cause and effect would be direct cause and effect would be just on our plane of existence, just on the material plane. But there's a third indirect element to that. So it's like we go along this line of cause and effect, but then there's a corresponding cause and effect up here as well.
And so more of like a spiritual realm is what you're saying.
Exactly, yeah. Some realm that is not perceptible to the usual 5 senses. So then there's the principle of vibration, and this has been quantified now by, I think it was Max Planck or some physicist back in the 40s or whatever, where everything is moving, everything is vibrating. And the difference between different manifestations of matter and energy and mind and even spirit results largely from the varying rate of vibration. So emotions have different levels of vibration as light does. You've got infrared light, and that vibrates at a different quality to different different types of light. Same for emotions, same for thoughts. And then there's the principle of polarity. And I think this is one of the most important ones conceptually for people to understand. It's the most accessible. It's the idea that everything has poles and there's a pair of opposites. And so like the truth is, well, if you're taking just one side, it is necessarily a half truth, because there's the shadow of it, or there's like the opposite side to it that must be considered. And that's why like you have this midline, this middle way, and that's where the truth lies, and that requires a lot of discernment to figure that out. You've got love and hate, and then love and hate are just different degrees of like and dislike, but they're still on the other side. And the next one, seeing as we're almost there, is rhythm, the principle of rhythm. And that's everything flows, everything has its tides, all things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. So the measure of the swing to the left is then equal to the measure of the swing to the right. And yeah, that's observable as well. Like we gave the example with drugs, for example. Take drugs, they're going to throw you up, they'll throw your dopamine up there, and then you're going to have that serotonin depletion. I think that was one. And then we got the principle of cause and effect. everything has a cause, or every cause has an effect, and every effect has a cause. Um, and there are many planes of causation. This is kind of like what we were talking about. So things can occur at different planes: the spiritual plane, the mental plane, the causal plane. And then the final one is the principle of
Hmm.
gender. And that gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Okay, and that's, like, obviously we have material gender, sex gender, basically. But then there's the gender principle within lots of different things. Like one thing may appear
Hmm.
to be more masculine, I guess, and that could be subjective. But what the Hermetic principles would say is it may be subjective to your current perception of it, but it is there. There is a masculine principle and there is a feminine principle. These run
Mm.
through everything.
I mean, that makes sense.
So that's the 7 Hermetic
I mean, what's
principles.
so funny about them is we have somewhat talked about most, if not all of them, in this episode indirectly. In a way, we talked about mentalism. We talked about polarity. We talked about the gender stuff, kind of correspondence, like all these things. It's almost reflected back at us in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's that they are like, they're the Hermetic laws. They exist whether you like them or not, and so it's worth being sort of observing them. And the idea of the Hermetic initiation, or the sycophant in the Hermetic principles, is that the adept rather, this is like if you understand it and you use it to your advantage. So let's take polarity, for example. The adept would be able to find that midline and unify those poles. Or if you take rhythm, where you've got the pendulum swinging one way, the adept would be able to mitigate the backswing, right? So, I don't really know if there are mystery schools that exist in the world now that's like teach adepts how to work with the Hermetic principles, but this is what it was like in Egypt.
It almost reminds me of alchemy in a way, and like becoming the art of becoming like an alchemist. And it seems like you almost have to live life to figure out how to be that person versus studying it in a school. It seems like it's something that you only figure out through action and through like living a life well lived.
Yeah, 100%. If it remains in the theoretical realm, it doesn't exist. It has to be actualized in some
And
form.
so, if you want to learn about this stuff, is it the Kabbalah, or is that a different set of ideas?
The Kabbalah is different. They take from each other. Like there are certain, the Hermetic principles are appreciated and understood in the Kabbalah, but the Kabbalah is different. The Kabbalah ostensibly is more complex. I'm not an aficionado on it. I understand it superficially, but yeah, it's the Tree of Life, or the Sephirot. You may have seen it, yeah, and it's essentially describing the creation. So coming from nothing and then being sort of emanating down a chain of densities into material reality. That's what it describes.
Do you have any favorite books? Because you're clearly a person who is well researched and well read. Is there any that stick out to you? I know it's one of those things that you almost need to know a person personally to be able to recommend a book to them. But do you have any clear-cut favorites that you'd recommend to people?
Okay. Well, I think so. My school of thought, I wouldn't say that. It's more like what I understand the most, what I've been fortunate enough to learn in a official way, almost everything I know is autodidactic, meaning that I taught it myself. But I have had a mentor who was is he's an old man now, which is quite cool. Like, oh, it's a weird situation where you have a mentor who's like 50 years older than you. Because it's like, "No, just give me like advice for like right now," and he'll be like, or I'll say, like, well, why is this bad stuff happening to me? What do I do now? And he'll just be like, it's good, it's good. And I'm like, is it? And then you later find out, yeah, okay, actually, interestingly, it was. Um, but he came from the school of Rudolf Steiner, right, which is, it's called anthroposophy. And it's it's called spiritual science, which is the way it's understood. That's how Steiner described it. And I guess the book that people can start with is, I believe it's called Initiations into Higher Realms. And this is kind of an easy, it's not easy. I don't know why I'm lying. It's not easy. But but it's an introduction into, let me just look it up to make sure I get the name right. It's been a long time since I read it. But it's an introduction into this idea. So knowledge of the higher
knowledge of the
worlds
higher worlds
is what the book is called. Yeah, or how to know higher worlds. So that's a good book to start with. I think, for the young, like Faustian aspirational chads, they should read. They could read Bronze Age Mindset by Bronze Age Pervert. I mean, I read that like 5 years ago now when it first came out, and that was pretty influential in my life. I don't necessarily agree with all of Bap's assumptions, but it's very entertaining and opened a door to a new way of looking at life. So I would recommend the young lads read that. It really depends where you're at, like we have mini cycles within bigger cycles. So we might have a cycle where we need to grind and focus on
action,
just like what we're doing right in front of us in action. And then we have a cycle where we're like, now we will need some higher knowledge now to inform the next stage of our action. So, it's hard for me to say
absolutely.
Unless I know the person.
And I think in a way that's a sign of somebody who like actually gets it, is like understanding that there's like so much nuance there. But you mentioned your mentor, and that's something that always sticks out to me when people talk about their mentors, because it seems like it's one of those things that almost puts you at a fast track to knowledge, is having a mentor. Was that the case for you?
Definitely, yeah. But the mentor, like the way it works is you don't go looking for a mentor. Yeah, when you're ready, when the student is ready, the teacher appears or whatever, which is true. Like you just fall into a mentorship because it's like the universe constructs it to be the case in that sort of way. And there are different mentors for different things. This guy is not going to be a business mentor for me, but in terms of like a spiritual mentor, a mentor in understanding reality, it's been unbelievable. Like, and I met him in this community in Paraguay. So again, like if I'd never made that decision, I never would have met him. And he's like this 85-year-old Romanian man, like the wisest motherfucker you could possibly imagine. Too wise to the point where I'm like, I don't understand. Help me. And then he just asked me more questions, and I'm like,
that's amazing. Yeah.
But then it makes sense. Like afterwards, later down the line, you realize like something is like they seeded a little thought, and then whatever that was seeded blooms and blossoms, like grows like a flower. And then you see it and you realize
that's such a good feeling
when something happens in your life. Yeah.
And in a way, you're somewhat of a mentor now in the job that you're taking, doing the coaching that you do. And along those lines, I wanted to ask you about, it's a question I love to ask my guests because I feel like it opens the audience and myself up to, or it gives you a lens into their thought and how they think about things. And it's, if you were to have a school, what would the curriculum look like?
Okay, well, it's a cool question because I kind of do have a school in a way. I mean, I don't, but with my clients, I mean, some of my clients, we just work with what's going on in their life in front of them. And then other clients, they come to me because they want to know more. And so then there is a curriculum, there is a course. And I will be releasing an actual course, like where you don't have to have me as your personal consultant, but it will just be a course that you can get online, a video and written course. So the curriculum is a mixture of things. So it is spiritual science, which is from Steiner's anthroposophy. And to understand the context of that, Steiner was a Christian, but it's esoteric Christianity. It's very different from going to church and listening to the Gospels. It's sort of dissecting these things in a different way. And it's also informed by the Rosicrucian tradition. And the Rosicrucians were a society that loosely formed in the medieval times as a way to explore like esoteric concepts. All of the founding fathers were Rosicrucians. All the founding fathers of the United States, yeah. And there was never a formalized society like the Freemasons or something. The point was not to form something formalized. It did eventually form, but then it hasn't really been the same. And it does still exist, but I don't know in what form or what the teaching's like. It's more like the principles of the Rosicrucianism is this sort of esoteric alchemy, esoteric understanding about spiritual worlds and the physical worlds and the tasks that we have to do in this age to further us along our spiritual evolution. So we would talk about the being of man, which is what you are, and that's your body, your soul, and your spirit. And these three distinct realms that are all integrated. Okay, and so and within the body, within the soul, within the spirit, there are subdivisions, and it's quite scientific. It's not like too airy-fairy, but it's very good to understand because it clarifies certain things like how to think properly, how to think about things properly. And then when you can do this, you bring your subtle body, your energetic body, into more congruence. And then, this is how you develop mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So, yeah, on one side of the course, right, would be an internal kind of work. Like you come to understand the body, the soul, the spirit, what intuition is, like what synchronicities are, serendipity, why that works, how to increase them, and how to like sort of understand things in your life from a particular perspective, from a spiritual perspective, let's say. It gives meaning to what otherwise would seem like chaos.
And how is the soul and the spirit different?
Well, I'm glad the soul. The soul is something. Okay, let me try and be succinct. So, the soul is something that you have inside you. It's housed in your body, and the soul houses the spirit. So it's like Russian dolls, if you will. Okay, but there are layers to the soul. The first layer would be called the sentient soul, and the sentient soul is you take in information from the world around you via your sense perceptions, and then we move this into our sentient soul and we prescribe a value to these things, like whether you like it or you don't like it, and then this informs your action. Okay, But what this is not the thing itself. You've created a new world inside you that doesn't, isn't actually truly correlated to the tree that you looked at. Oh, I don't like that tree. Does that mean the tree's bad? No, it doesn't. You've created this new world in the soul, right? Criminals, for example, they can't really overcome their sentient soul, and so they will act, without thinking that, okay, I've just created these sensations. This is not a reflection of what it actually is. This is just me. Okay, so we try to move past that into the next layer of the soul, called the intellectual soul, and this is where we can look at our sensations, how we like things or don't like them, and we can say, okay, I appreciate that this isn't a reflection on the thing. So that's that next stage of the soul. You're able to not like hurt that person because you realize like I need to control my sensations. And then you have the next stage, which is the consciousness soul. And this is where this is the gateway to the spirit, and this is sort of where the soul and the spirit meet. And if you do certain things and you work to build your consciousness soul, the spirit comes into you, essentially, and you get filled with the good, the true, and the beautiful. And this just affects a lot of other things that will go on in your life. It's a practice that you develop. Basically, I've tried to explain it, but I know that may not make.
I think it
very
does
good
make sense. It kind of reminds me of what Jung said: when you're on the right path, the universe winks at you. Almost, it's almost
That's
like that, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it wants to come into you, really, so you become more integrated. So the spirit is the universe, let's say. The spirit, everything, all material objects, planets, let's say, they all have they're material beings, but they are spiritual beings as well. So there's a correspondence there on a different plane that we can't really perceive. And all mystery schools throughout history have dedicated their lives to trying to understand this and come to terms with it. And if people think it's not important, well, then go and tell billionaires who literally other than making money, the really clever ones spend all their time doing this kind of stuff.
I mean,
because
you see it time and time again, especially these very wealthy people. They almost dive into meditation or just some sort of spiritual art to try to better align themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you can better align yourself, things go better for you. There is a certain element to pushing up against a brick wall, and you think and you can't go anywhere, right? And that would be if you view the world as purely materialistic, you will eventually hit a brick wall. But if you can view the world as both materialistic and spiritual, then you can just go, all right, well, I'll just walk around the wall. Because there are different tools for different scenarios.
And what I love about this is, even if you don't believe it in the physical sense, let's say you're a very reductionist thinker, even if you look at it through the lens of just how does this affect my life and how can this improve my life, that belief and that understanding that it's not just material, there's a spiritual element in things, it allows you to just understand that it's an infinite game, and when you make all the money, there's still levels to ascend to. And even if you don't believe in whatever it may be, a god, the universe, whatever, you can still have this understanding of daily working to be just more disciplined and more aligned with your soul. And that doesn't have to be this airy-fairy spiritual thing. It could be very disciplined and in the real world, or real world, quote unquote. But it's the same thing.
Yeah. It is the same thing. And you got to do both. like we've spoken a lot about spirituality, but I just came from the gym and had a delicious back session. You know, like I I played I played rugby for 20 like 15, 16 years of my life constantly, you know, to a university level, which is fairly high. Um, like I'm not some sort of guru on a mountain. Like you know, I like the material just as much, but I like have always been drawn to these other aspects because I understand that there's something more. There's something going on that I want to be the
Yes.
master of both worlds. You know, not just the master of one. People in history, like real sort of leaders and successful people throughout history, they've been masters of both worlds, not just one. So that's the goal, and that's how we can really affect things positively. You know, you want to affect things further upstream rather than like down at the bottom where it
Hmm.
meets the sea. You want to affect it at the top, and that's kind of this thing between the spirit and the material. The spiritual is upstream, the energy behind things that we can't really perceive unless we have a Geiger counter, a test for radiation, or we have like, you know, a certain photography called like helium photography, which is light sensitive, so it can actually trace the energetic um,
Hmm.
outline
Whoa,
of objects with the photography, so you can see.
that's so
Yeah,
cool.
um, it's really cool. Yeah, it's called the Kirlian leaf experiment. So they cut off the top half of the leaf, but they use the photography um, to trace the light body, and you could see the residue of the light body at the top of the leaf, even though the physical thing
Wow.
wasn't there anymore.
I forget.
So everything's got this
Yeah,
imprint.
that's crazy. I think that what is it? I'm trying to think of the exact example, but like some people, when you cut off a limb, they would still like feel pain, and like let's say cut off the hand, they'll still feel like a pain in a
Yeah,
finger that's like not actually there.
yeah. Phantom limb
Wow,
syndrome.
yeah,
Mm,
it's that same thing, right?
yeah. Well, it is. Yeah, and it's also because pain centers are not associated with limb damage. It's actually uh,
Whoa.
in the brain. Yeah. So, like, you know, you can have a decimated, like, broken arm and stuff, but it's the brain that creates the pain, not the actual limb. That's why they can have phantom limb syndrome, which is where they feel like they've still got
Mhm.
a hand when they don't, which is really interesting, crazy.
Orpheus. Oh, sorry, cut
So
you off.
just to,
Go.
yeah, okay, I'll just finish the
Yes, finish it.
curriculum.
We
Okay,
we got we
be
got
very
too
quick.
stuck in the weeds there
Um,
with the body and the spirit.
that's good. It's good. Um, so then I guess I would talk about, or I would involve uh, the collective destiny. So one side we were talking about was just the individual, you know, what's important for you, and then the other one is the sort of collective destiny, and that's like generally raising the vibration of everything around you, so things go better, so people are cooler and better to hang out. Um, and then dealing with like these polarities that we've talked about and the sort of general esoteric overview of past, present, and the future. So that would be it in a nutshell. Um, and that will be the course that
Let's
I'll be
go.
releasing
I'm
soon.
excited for that. Do you have a timeline for it?
Well, I want to make it
Nice.
good production, so I want to like it'll be recorded and like be entertaining, not just informative, um, and interactive. So I would say two
Oh
to four
shit.
weeks
Very soon.
should be ready.
Let's go.
Yeah, because the body of the work is all done. It's just a
Shooting.
matter
Yeah.
of
Awesome.
producing it. Yeah.
Is there anything we haven't talked about today that you want to cover? Anything that's been on your mind or front of mind lately?
Um, yeah, I guess the one thing that, you know, because we've covered like the soul and like these pretty high concepts. But there's, the one thing that I think we all need to focus on as well is the body, physical health, because that informs. Obviously, we want to be physically healthy, so we've got energy and creativity and all those sorts of things. But the physical body also informs the soul. You can't actually have good spiritual development without physical
Absolutely.
development. So that would be
I love
the
it.
last
I
thing.
love it. I mean, it's so true. It's something I've noticed in my own life. Like what the saying is, a sick man or a healthy man wants a lot of things. A sick man only wants one. And it's like when
Mm-hmm.
your body, your heart, your gut, when these things aren't in alignment, you aren't able to reach that next spiritual plane because you're so concerned about this physical self.
Mm.
And you almost need to get to a point where it's in alignment, so you're able to think about these things in a higher way.
Yeah, exactly. I'd not heard that, but that's a
It's
really good way of
interesting.
putting it. What did it say? Yeah, the healthy man wants many things, but the sick
Yeah.
man just wants one. Yeah, nice,
Orpheus,
nice,
dude,
bro.
this was enlightening. It was awesome. And I so appreciate your time
Yeah,
today.
thanks, Steve. I appreciate you having me on. I've had a great time. Um,
Me
I'm
too.
really glad we did
Yeah,
this.
this was I knew it was going to be good, but you surpassed my expectations for sure. Which,
Cheers, man.
cheers,
I
brother.
appreciate that. Yeah.